Hello, and welcome to today's daily news report where I cover all the biggest stories affecting your life and money. Today, I want to share some information with my YouTube community that is as fascinating as it is terrifying. The US media is essentially ignoring this because they don't want you to know what's really going on. However, without Americans knowing, there is a war going on between two major groups that are both trying to collapse the United States of America and the US dollar. The first is the World Economic Forum, or WEF, which are the billionaires around the world that secretly meet in Davos, Switzerland, and the plans they have to take control of humanity through world leaders. So basically, they're trying to infiltrate NATO leaders to get them to comply with their plan. The other is the Russia-China duo, where they're trying to not only collapse the United States, but they're trying to shelter themselves from this Great Reset by building a new system called BRICS, or sometimes BRICS, with new groups coming in like Nigeria. Anyway, these countries are banding together in NATO-like fashion to try to squeeze the United States out of being a superpower and also collapse the US dollar as the world reserve currency. Now, I've partnered with Andy Schekman. You can look him up. He's all over YouTube. He's the owner of Miles Franklin, which is a gold and silver distribution company. And he's one of the smartest people I've met in the last year. And he's going to walk you through what these groups are doing, the timeline, and how gold and silver might be the only way to survive if the Great Reset collapses the US dollar. So pay attention. He's going to walk you through everything so that you can understand it. He's also going to share why President Biden most likely went to Saudi Arabia, the real reason. It's fascinating. He's also going to talk about all the different events that are taking place and how to protect your family and your wealth. So this is a very important interview. I'm going to try to leave some timestamps down below so that you can get through it, but don't miss it. But without further ado, let's go ahead and roll the film. Let's jump in for a minute and talk about, there's so much going on. There's the BRICS, with countries coming together to try to overthrow the dollar by using natural resources. We have a lot going on with COMEX. We have a government that is spending money like it's their job instead of their job to be fiscally responsible. And it's making people very, very nervous. And there's not one person watching this that doesn't feel inflation because of all of the money printing in the last 2 years. So let's maybe talk about what's going on with the BRICS situation, and also what's going on, or why own gold and silver. Let's start with those two topics.
Well, so there has been a progression of events, Stephen, that I have talked about really incessantly for the last year and a half. This progression of events that started really in 2017, and I'm going to try to go through them kind of double speed here to not bog us down. But you know, in 2017, out of nowhere, the German Bundesbank said to the world, "Give us back our gold." You see, the United States have been holding most of the world's gold since the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, the dollar took over for the pound sterling as the world reserve currency. And the only tier one asset at that point, which is a riskless asset as far as the banks are concerned, were US dollars and treasuries. And, you know, after two world wars in Europe, they were beaten down. And I think that they felt it would be better to send the gold to the United States, because we said to the world, look, you give us your gold and we'll pay you $35 for it. And you can always exchange it back for $35 anytime you want. And the reason they would give us their gold, aside from it being the engine of growth and prosperity and on another continent away from all the trouble that had happened over the previous 50 years with two world wars, was that they could sell us their gold. We would pay them $35. They would take those proceeds, Stephen, and they would buy treasuries. And now they could get a return on a non-interest bearing asset, right? And so we held most of the world's gold because, after all, they could always sell the dollars back to us and get their gold at a fixed rate of $35. But getting that return, buying our treasuries, not only helped the United States build the infrastructure, but it helped give a return to assets in gold that didn't return any interest. And so, before I even answer this question, which is very important, I want to pose another question. I'm not asking you, but I want everyone out there to think, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? What makes the dollar the world reserve currency? Most people don't know. And if we were looking at it prior to, going way back to 1944, it would have been the fact that it was backed by gold, and any of the governments around the world could exchange their dollars for gold. So let's fast forward now, and we get to 1971. 1971, de Gaulle from France the president of France realized that we were printing more dollars than there was gold backing the currency, and to fund the Vietnam War. So he sent ships over to New York Harbor filled with dollars and said, give us the gold. And it was at that point that President Nixon, in August of 1971, closed the gold window. It's supposed to be temporarily. It's never opened back up. So we went back on our word to the world. And at that point, the dollar was completely fiat. All right. So this is where the story starts. So in 2017, the German Bundesbank said to the world very aggressively, to the United States, but broadcasted all over the world, give us back our gold. We want it. We want it back. It's very strange because we were in the midst of a 6-year downdraft in gold. It was a bear market at that point. From 2011 to 2017, it was straight down, and Bitcoin was going up. And really, there was a lot of capitulation in the gold community. It was unusual. Within a few weeks of that happening, the Bank of Austria, the Bank of Turkey, the Dutch National Bank, the Bank of Poland, the Bank of Hungary, this large swath of Eastern European banks all did the same thing: give us back our gold. And they said the same thing to the Bank of England, which, again, this is all really strange because these banks were net sellers of gold for the previous decade prior. All of these things that are happening aren't making a lot of sense. 2019 rolls along. Those numbers are up almost 100%. Now the banks are really going into overdrive, and you can obviously throw in Russia, India, China. They're all accumulating gold. The very first thing that I would say was probably the very biggest event of my career, rather, happened in April of 2019. I don't know this. And a lot of the things that I'm going to say to you over the next 10 minutes, Stephen, most people haven't heard of. And I would like you out there to Google this and fact check what I'm saying. And I think you'll be surprised at what you see. So, mile marker number one, the biggest event of my career, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central banker's central bank. And mind you, I am going somewhere with this to answer your question, but I have to set the stage. The Bank of International Settlements says to the world that gold is now revalued as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset. So for 70 plus years, it's been dollars and treasuries. And out of nowhere, the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, reclassifies gold as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset. Now let's look at what happened the 2.5 years before. Central banks are repatriating their gold and massively accumulating it. Massively. In 2018, they buy more gold as a group than they did in the 60 years previously combined, and then double that the next year. And then the BIS reclassifies it as a tier 1. It seems as though they might have been clued in on this new revision. 2020 rolls along, and we start to see some things that I think are absolutely mind-numbing that most people here, again, don't know about. And this is a really, really big deal. In 2020, we see the rise of the Belt Road Initiative. Now, I don't know if you've talked much about this to your group, but to me, I look at this as one of the biggest events of all of our lives. This is Asia's attempt, or China's attempt, at connecting Asia and Africa and part of Europe. It's the old Silk Road. It is connecting 75% of human population, right? And so you have this massive group of people that are now being connected, and all of the trade and all of the contracts are settling on the new Chinese digital yuan. Absent is the dollar, absent is the West. And so you have this massive infrastructure that is taking place that is usurping the dollar. So 2020, still in 2020, we see the International Monetary Fund come out and say this is 200 countries from around the world that say we want a new Bretton Woods, we want a new system. Later on in that year, we get the numbers that the banks had doubled what they bought in 2019, massive gold accumulation, all repatriating their gold, huge infrastructure programs happening. The dollar and the US is not part of it. Now, I'm going a little bit faster on this stuff than I normally do because I know time is a constraint, but I want people to understand that there's this linear progression of events that we're getting to. 2021 and 2022 start to blow your mind. All right. 2021, Russia, Turkey, India, Poland, China, Kazakhstan, Hungary, Thailand, Japan, Brazil, massively accumulating gold. All of these countries massively accumulating gold. And then comes mile marker number 3, the third biggest event of my career that most people don't know about. And I'm going to ask you again, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? Well, after 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, it was backed by nothing. 3 years later, Henry Kissinger was dispatched to Saudi Arabia and he struck a deal with the Saudi kingdom. And he said, we will protect you. Let's call it a joint military cooperation agreement. We've got your back. No one will ever mess with you again. But for that privilege, you will denominate oil globally in US dollars, globally. So for the past 50 years, every single country on the planet Earth has had to own dollars in order to buy oil. It has given the hegemony that we call the petrodollar. The reserve currency of the world is the dollar because of the protection of the Saudi kingdom and the agreement to back or to value oil globally through OPEC in dollars. Okay, so mile marker number 3, the third biggest event in my career, and maybe the biggest event of all of our lives. No one's talking about it. Nobody knows about it. Google it. The day we left Afghanistan. Now, Stephen, I don't know how old you are. I just turned 52 years old. And the world that I grew up in the United States, you never, ever, ever, ever would have left a soldier or any U.S. infantrymen or any U.S. people in a war zone behind enemy lines. You never would have pulled out, leaving Americans behind enemy lines, especially in hostile enemy lines like we did in Afghanistan. And I think there is no coincidence to the timing of this announcement. The day after we left Afghanistan, with people hanging from a transport plane in a very humiliating fashion. I'm a patriot. I love this country, just like you do with that flag behind you. I love this country. I was embarrassed on a supreme scale that our administration thought it was okay to leave Americans behind. And the people who trusted us to their own detriment, the Afghanis who trusted us, the freedom fighters, we left them behind too. And we gave their biometrics to the Taliban. It was humiliating. The day after that, mile marker number 3, maybe the biggest event of all of our lives, and that is Russia and Saudi Arabia announce a joint military cooperation agreement. Let me say that one more time. Saudi Arabia announces a joint military cooperation agreement with Russia. I thought we were protecting them. I thought that's what gave us the dollar hegemony. The day after that, Nigeria announces the same relationship. Do you know, subsequently, Nigeria and Saudi Arabia have both agreed to sell their oil to China for a yuan-denominated bond. Right now, these two massive OPEC-producing countries are selling their oil for the first time in something other than US dollars. They sell it to China for a bond called the Petro-Yuan bond that is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Let me keep going. So 2022 comes along, and this is when we see some very, very important things. We see Russia kicked out of SWIFT. Now, I think this is the biggest deal of all, maybe, that, and I'm going to ask you, and I want you to think, you don't have to answer. And the question I will ask is, was this intended? Was the consequences of that move intended or unintended? Are our leaders that foolish to think that doing something like that would not make the rest of the world say, are we next? You know, China sold 120 billion in our bonds over the last 7 months because they have their eyes set on Taiwan. Why would they want to own our assets if they feared sanctions, if they feared being kicked out of SWIFT, if they feared freezing of assets across the US? Well, they wouldn't. And so I think we have incentivized the world to look or a back door. And I say that to you because subsequently from this happening, now, before I even tell you the subsequent, let's just say one other thing. The amount of money produced since the onset of COVID to where we are right now is greater than all of the money created in the history of the United States. So they printed over $6 trillion in just a couple of years, and most of that money went into assets that have been blown up sky high, stocks, bonds, and real estate to all-time highs, and they're all inversely correlated to a rise in interest rates. And this is why I believe the Federal Reserve is not being genuine when they tell us they're going to get tough on inflation. You know, Paul Volcker got tough on inflation in 1980, Stephen, when he raised the federal funds rate to 19.75%. We raised it to 2.25%, and the 30-year mortgage rate goes from 3 to 7%. It over doubles by raising it to 2.25%. Yet inflation, measured by their faulty CPI, which excludes food, energy, and housing, which would be 17 or 18% if measured the way it used to be, is at 8.5%. Even taking their bogus numbers, a 30-year bond or a 10-year treasury rather, paying 3% is negative real return of 5.5%. They're not getting tough on inflation. If they do, they're going to blow things up. But what about incentivizing or creating a villain? You push Russia out of SWIFT right into the open arms of the Chinese and their CIPS system, the cross interbank payment system, which mirrors the SWIFT. So here's where it starts to get really scary. And the BRICS nations start to come into play. Since this has happened, we're seeing things across the board. We're seeing Turkey come out and say, not only do we want to join BRICS, but they're also saying that they're only going to buy Russian energy in any currency other than the dollar. We're seeing Russia strike unilateral deals with India for arms and energy, only to be settled in rupee and in rubles. All of these used to settle in dollars. We're seeing Saudi Arabia come out and say, well, we're going to contemplate joining the BRICS nations. Now, I would submit that when you say that on the public stage, contemplation means you're doing it. And if we think that Biden went to Saudi Arabia, he hasn't even had the courage to go to the Mexican-Texas border, yet he goes to Saudi Arabia to beg for oil when we are going completely and totally green. No, he was begging them not to join the BRICS nations. We are seeing all of these deals that are being set all around the world. We're seeing countries that want to join the BRICS nations, such as Iran just joined, Venezuela just joined. Most of the Eastern European countries are talking about joining. But if Saudi Arabia joins the BRICS nations, I don't think people understand what that really means. You know, when you talk about Brazil, Russia, China, India, South Africa, and then you add into it all of the countries that are joining, and there are many of them that are already have joined, like Iran and Venezuela and Algeria, and Turkey is talking about joining, and many of Egypt is talking about joining. They're all talking about joining the BRICS. All it would take would be Saudi Arabia to say, and this is why I want people to think, was it intended or not? Because are we so far indebted, 130 trillion of funded and unfunded liabilities? Are we so far indebted that maybe they realize that they really can't back out of this? Because if they raise rates high enough, the Fed will blow everything up and they'll be written about in history books. But instead, you have a villain, and that's the East, the OPEC, the Putin, the Xi, the BRICS nations. Because here's what happens. Now, think about the Belt Road Initiative. 75% of human population settling on all these contracts, settling on the new digital yuan. That's just China and Africa. But you add in all of these other countries, you're talking 90% of human population. And all it would take, Stephen, all it would take for things to get very, very, very interesting would be for Saudi Arabia to say, thanks for the memories, guys. It's been wonderful. It's been a great experience. But we have decided, since we are now going to join the BRICS nations, they have publicly said we're contemplating it. That means they're going to do it. And if they do, and they come out and say, look, you know, what they're thinking is the West is not getting tough on inflation. They're going to inflate away their currency like every administration has ever done, going all the way back to the Roman times, where all governments choose inflation over austerity. They say, you know what? We are going to open up oil purchases in rupee, in ruble, in yuan, in gold, and dollars and euro. And like that, all of the countries on the planet Earth that have been holding dollars will have to immediately decide, do I dump them or not? And because I think the dollar will become a hot potato. Most of these countries around the globe have only held dollars because they have no choice but to buy oil with it. If that happens and Saudi Arabia makes this declaration that we're joining BRICS and we're opening up oil and other currencies, we're being protected by Russia. By proxy, we're also being protected by China as part of the BRICS nations. If those dollars come flooding home across the globe, dollars get dumped and they come home, it creates hyperinflation like you can't even believe. What happens in that event? Interest rates go to the moon because inflation and interest rates move in the same direction. You have to raise interest rates to compensate for the loss of purchasing power through inflation. There's your villain. There's your Great Reset, because the dollars collapse as every country on the planet dumps them, creating a crash in the dollar market, a spike in interest rates, and what is inversely correlated to the spike in rates? Stocks, bonds, and real estate. And so when we talk about the BRICS nations, they are coalescing. Because we weaponize the dollar as the world reserve currency, it is not our responsibility to say who can and can't use the dollar. That should be for world opinion. By weaponizing the dollar, we have incentivized this coalition, I believe, against the United States, against the West. They are saying, we're next. Are they going to freeze our assets? And I really do truly believe that people don't quite get how fragile this really is. And yet our media hasn't told us that gold is now a tier 1 asset, that the Bank of International Settlements reclassified it, that the International Monetary Fund requested a new system, that Saudi Arabia is now being protected by Russia, as is Nigeria, that both countries are now selling their oil to China for the petro yuan bond, which is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, and that the BRICS nations are welcoming Saudi Arabia into the fold. All of these things put together, I believe, make something very, very frightening, and that is a de-dollarization, a move away from the dollar. And if we lose our petro reserve status, things get very real very, very quickly. Now, I didn't really do this whole thing justice by not laying down the foundation, but I wanted to go through it as quickly as I can. But to simply say this, the Federal Reserve is a sideshow. What is really, really important right now, in my opinion, is what happens to the petrodollar. And if Saudi Arabia joins BRICS, like I believe they will, we're going to lose the petro reserve status. And if that happens, those dollars come home, interest rates spike, and there's your Klaus Schwab moment. There's your Great Reset, where everything collapses at the exact same time. And I don't think people really stop to think just on the razor, how close we are to this razor's edge. And I think it's closer than we've ever been, truly.
Wow. I just wanted to talk about gold and silver, but oh my gosh, this has been so insightful. You know, I've just now started sharing with my community what the World Economic Forum is doing. And every time I read it, I'm like so blown away. I'm like, I've got to make a video about this. And so, but like everything you just said already answers the next question of why gold and silver are just so very important for people to have. And anyway, unbelievable. So let's talk. I've only got just a couple minutes left, and then I've got to jump on to something else. But let's just talk about why people should be holding gold and silver. I have it. I've been trying to tell people in my community to have it. The Wall Street just keeps sucking people's money in. But why should people have some of their money in gold and silver?
Well, the biggest money in the world right now, Stephen, is pulling their money off of the COMEX market. And I think this is very important to understand that gold and silver are wealth. They've been wealth for 5,000 years. To me, gold and silver is not an investment. Gold is wealth. But something very interesting has happened over the last over the last few weeks, over the last few days, actually, that is really, really, I think needs to be, look, the biggest money in the world always front runs what's coming next. And if you look at what's happened off the COMEX market in one day last week, the uber wealthy took 41% of all the physical bullion kilo bars off the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. These are the most well-funded, well-informed private investors in the world. Let's call them the sovereign wealth funds and the family offices. They delivered 174,612,000 ounces off of COMEX. It's as if they think something wicked this way comes. But let me explain to you just how big that is. The most sophisticated private money in the world is bleeding dry the exchanges. The 50-day average rate of gold withdrawal off of the COMEX market, where the price is set, hit a high right now last week of 131,293 ounces a day. In other words, that's on average 131,293 ounces of gold, or $233 million worth, has been withdrawn from the COMEX every day for the past 50 days. That is the biggest money in the world is de-dollarizing at the same time. Why do people want to own gold and silver? Because it is wealth. And if you look at, there's a company called Ibbotson, Ibbotson. They were bought by Morningstar. Ibbotson is a market analysis company. And they came out and they said, because interest rates are so low, that they're the only inversely correlated asset class to the US stock market right now are precious metals. And so when you talk about why you own gold and silver, it's not to get wealthy. It's not an investment. To me, it is wealth. It has been wealth for 5,000 years. It has outlived German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and every pandemic. You own gold and silver not to get wealthy, but because it is wealth. And quite frankly, I hope I never need to use my gold and silver. If I do, I'm darn glad I have it. Not just for an emergency, it could be an opportunity. If not, I pass it on to my children. And I think that is the reason to own gold and silver, because we are entering a period of great uncertainty. And I would rather lean on 5,000 years worth of historical wealth than roll with the punches. And I think there are too many things that are happening too quickly for me to feel comfortable anywhere else.
Yeah, no, this has been so insightful. This is why I buy my gold from you. Like,
I appreciate
these insights, and I'm trying to share this with my community as quickly as I can. How would people, if they want to learn more about gold and silver and buy from Miles Franklin, what's the best way to do that? And can they use my name to, get in? Because I mean, if that much money is moving, I want to make sure my community is getting access to the gold and silver. So what would be the best way for them to reach out?
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, Stephen, that much is moving. It is wholly unusual to see this kind of metal moving off of the exchanges. And it's not just happening there. It's on the London Metals Exchange. It's on the backdooring out of SLV. SLV has seen 100 million ounces taken out of it by the commercial banks in the last 4 months. And that just doesn't mean selling. It means taking possession of. And this is really the key here. Anyways, I know we're tight for time, and I've really tried to speed this whole progression up. But here's the deal. We have a new website that will be launched in 2 to 3 weeks at most. In the meantime, our milesfranklin.com website is still up. You cannot purchase online right now. Our store is inoperable. Here's what you do. You send us an email at info@milesfranklin.com, info@milesfranklin.com. And in the subject line, put Stephen sent me. If you have questions about what I just talked about, say I need to talk to Andy, and I will go through this whole progression of events and I won't skip anything, and I'll blow you away. But here's the deal. I will promise your listeners and you that your listeners not only will get the best service and the most attentive service in the industry, I will guarantee the best prices in the industry for your listeners. We have done this for 33 years without a customer complaint. Your listeners will not be the first. Send us an email at info@milesfranklin. We will send you a up-to-date inventory list until the new site is done. We'll answer all your questions. If you want to be contacted by me or one of my brokers, let us know. will make it the best experience you've ever had. And no one in the United States will touch my prices. I guarantee it.
No, I know that. I know you have been so great to work with when I've called in and spoken with your team. So professional, and I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you taking time. You're busier than I am, and I'm a busy guy, and so you have given so much education right here about what's going on, and now people need to reach out. And maybe they can't buy a bunch of gold, but they could start with silver. Or those that want to, they can get into the gold. But I just want to thank you so much for all the research that you do, the information that you are sharing, and just how professional you and your team are with the people that I've sent your way for getting into gold and silver.
I appreciate that. And for the record, Stephen, I do believe that silver is the most undervalued commodity on the planet. And there are very few things in this world where you have massive duality in demand between industrial and monetary in a depleted asset. There's so many things I would like to, if we had an hour, to explain to you and your listeners. Give us a call, give us a chance. We'll explain all of these things. We'll lay it out for you in a very simple and easy to understand way. We'll make sure that it's a great experience. We'll make sure you're not the first customer complaint we've ever had, and we'll make sure you get the very best price in the United States. I'd love to come back when time permits, Stephen, because I have so much I want to tell you, and I know time is tight today, but thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and I can't wait to talk to your listeners and all of you out there. Give us a shot. I guarantee you'll be glad you did.
Great. Thank you very much. Our next one, we'll talk about why silver is so undervalued, and we'll go a little bit deeper on gold and silver. But thank you very much and have a great evening.
You as well, Stephen. Thank you so much.